Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. Politics, it gets stranger and stranger. For months, the talking heads and pundits said Donald Trump would fade away. Instead, he's the clear front-runner among Republicans. And amazingly, he won another major victory in South Carolina with strong support from evangelical Christians.
Well, Marco Rubio narrowly edged out Ted Cruz for second place, while Jeb Bush dropped out. Hillary Clinton also scored a big win this weekend over Bernie Sanders. And Gary Lane has the story.
Donald Trump's victory in South Carolina's primary gave him all 50 delegates, and it was evangelical voters who made the difference. Trump admitted he was surprised he won by more than 10%. Appearing on ABC's This Week, he said his competition was tough, especially from Ted Cruz, who put out robocalls against him on Election Day in South Carolina.
So I said to myself, wow, this is a tough business. These people are worse than Manhattan real estate developers. This is rough stuff, politics.
And it may get rougher in the days and weeks ahead. Trump is expected to win Tuesday's Nevada caucus. But from there, it's Super Tuesday next week on March 1st, when voters in 11 states go to the polls. Each of the top 3 candidates are expected to win some of those states. After Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, it's now clear that many Republican voters see Cruz as the conservative values candidate. Despite a close third-place finish, Cruz said he defied expectations in South Carolina. He's the only strong conservative remaining in the race.
Our game plan from day one was do well in the first 4 states and consolidate conservatives to go forward into Super Tuesday. I think we're positioned ideally to do exactly that.
Marco Rubio edged out Cruz to place second in South Carolina. Many Republicans may now view him as the most electable candidate against the Democrats. Rubio was asked Sunday if he can overtake GOP frontrunner Trump.
He's the frontrunner when you have 7 people running and they're dividing up 70% of the vote. We need to remember here, over 70% of Republicans nationally have basically said we're not voting for Donald Trump. And as long as that 70% is being divided up by 5 people, of course he's the front runner.
Rubio believes he'll do better once the Republican field narrows. Saturday night, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush dropped out of the presidential race after his disappointing showing in South Carolina. Rubio is likely to pick up some of his supporters. Ohio Governor John Kasich and Dr. Ben Carson also had poor performances in the Palmetto State, but they're staying in the race.
Now that we've sort of gotten the field down, we might actually start talking about policies and solutions.
Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, Saturday was a victorious day for Hillary Clinton.
We just won Nevada!
Democratic Socialist candidate Bernie Sanders reminded supporters that while Mrs. Clinton may have won Nevada, he received only 3 delegates less than she did in the state. Actor Danny Glover joined Sanders campaigning in South Carolina, where Sanders said his campaign has momentum.
If you look at national polls and you want a candidate who is going to defeat Donald Trump, you're looking at that candidate.
But Cruz and Rubio say, hold on, there's still a long primary campaign ahead.
And yes, Trump is a frontrunner, and he could either solidify his campaign once his primary season goes national on Super Tuesday, or things could change if Marco Rubio wins some states and Ted Cruz starts celebrating more wins like he did in Iowa. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, if you want my famous take on all this, the Donald has surprised everybody. He's coming in here to Regent. By the way, on Wednesday, I'll have the privilege of talking to him and introducing him to our audience. He'll be February the 24th, and we'll have an interesting time. But he's, as he said, he can run the table, and it looks like it's happening. The only way that if a couple of those guys can swallow their egos, if, for example, Kasich, who would normally be leading the ticket, if he would go along with Rubio, form a ticket, and say, look, we're going to be president and vice president, and we're going to bring in Florida and Ohio, and we'll win the general election because of that. If they do something bold like that, they could maybe make a block that could stop Trump in these next few days. If they don't, he's got it. I mean, it's just that simple. And then the Republicans will have to live with it, whether they like it or not. He certainly would make an intriguing candidate. And I love the fact that he says that politics is rougher than Manhattan real estate. I mean, he knows his business. Well, in other news, The radical Islamic terrorists of ISIS have struck again with deadly bombings in Syria. Charlene Aaron has that story from our CBN newsroom. Here's here.
That's right, Pat. ISIS is claiming responsibility for a series of terror attacks in Syria that left up to 130 people dead. Multiple bombings and a car explosion ripped through the Syrian capital of Damascus during the peak of rush hour. Just an hour before, in the city of Homs, 50 people were murdered in similar bombings. The bombings were in areas dominated by Shia and Alawite Muslims who are hated by the Sunni radicals of ISIS. Meanwhile, that missing radioactive material in Iraq has been found. Iraq officials had been concerned that ISIS could use it as a weapon. Instead, Reuters reports it was found after it had been dumped near a gas station. And CBN's Chuck Holton spent the last week on the front lines of the battle against ISIS in Iraq, near the site of a chemical weapons attack, and will have his first report on tomorrow. Well, still more Palestinian stabbing attacks against Israelis were stopped over the weekend. Palestinian terrorists have been striking Israelis for more than 5 months on the streets, at the market, and even at work. One Israeli expert says that a key belief of Islam is driving some of these deadly attacks. And Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Throughout this wave of terror, security camera footage has documented the way Palestinians have attacked Israelis. One way to protect people from the cars is these concrete-filled posts placed around bus stops like this one. Many wonder what's behind these indiscriminate attacks. One Israeli expert believes she knows what's behind the madness. Anat Berko is a criminologist, a lieutenant colonel in the reserves, and a member of Israel's Knesset. She spent years interviewing Palestinians, many of them women who carried out terror attacks. While many blame what they call the oppression of Israel's occupation, Berko says it's often much more personal.
I found in many cases that it was something that women tried to escape from: imposed marriage, incest, or problems inside the family, or try to just escape from the house. And many of them, I interviewed many women, and they told me we have much more freedom in the Israeli prison than in our houses.
Berko says the Islamic promise of paradise often drives these attacks.
It's to go to a place that is much better, Jannah. Jannah, which means paradise. It's like for the males, they'll have the 72 virgins. For the girls, she cannot say, as they told me, I cannot say, I want to have sex. So they are speaking about to be one of the virgins, and if she was married, she'll meet her husband. If he was an abusive husband, he will go to Jahannam, to hell, and she'll go to paradise.
Berko sees a common thread in the terror attacks in Israel and the recent ones in San Bernardino, Paris, and Philadelphia.
But there is a problem right now that the West face, and they don't want to admit it, that there is something in this collective. I call it in my book Shahada Mania. Shahada, it's the obsessive to carry out istishhad, self-sacrifice. And mania, you know what is mania?
Berko says in this battle, Israel and the West are on the same side.
Israel is the good side in this equation. We are part of the West. We are the front line of the West. This is something that we need to stop, and to know that in Paris, that in New York, and in Tel Aviv, and in Jerusalem, the same enemy, the same phenomenon. And it's not about Israel, it's about all of us.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And here at home, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was laid to rest over the weekend. While President Obama did not attend the funeral, more than 3,000 people paid their respects to a justice who is almost certain to become a historic figure. Abigail Robertson brings us that story from Washington.
Justice Scalia's funeral was held here at the National Shrine of Immaculate Conception, a massive Roman Catholic edifice that seats about 2,600 people. The funeral was open to the public and followed by a private burial after. Vice President Biden and his wife were among the many friends and family who came to pay their respects to the beloved and honorable justice.
We have now received reconciliation.
Justice Scalia attended Xavier High School in New York and Georgetown University, both Jesuit institutions. In 1994, Scalia was awarded the James Cardinal Gibbons Medal by the Catholic University of America for his service to the Catholic Church. Many consider Justice Scalia the intellectual leader of the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, and some say he was the most important justice of his era.
He was brilliant, and there's no questioning that, but he was able to take that and make it more than just something, dry words on a page, but really reach people. With his humor, with his wit, he was a very nice guy. He was a very friendly guy. He wanted to make everyone around him happier.
He was a staunch defender of freedom. He was a staunch defender of the Constitution, and he tried his best to make sure that every one of the Supreme Court decisions he had a hand in got as close to the Founding Fathers' intent for this country as possible. His passing is really a devastating blow to the Constitution and to our country.
Justice Scalia is survived by his wife of nearly 56 years, 5 sons, 4 daughters, and 28 grandchildren. Hundreds of mourners, including the President and First Lady, came to the Supreme Court Friday to say goodbye to Justice Scalia, the current High Court's longest-serving justice, appointed by President Ronald Reagan in 1986. Justice Scalia was a devout Catholic who believed America has been blessed because it honors God. Reporting from the Supreme Court, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
We've certainly lost a real legal giant, Pat.
Well, we miss him, and I tell you, he came here. He was so generous with his time. We spent a lot of time together. He taught the students at Regent University. They loved him. He was so engaging. He took any questions they had to offer. He didn't duck anything. And he didn't hesitate either to put out some of those barbed comments and humorous comments. But he was a terrific guy.